It's possible to live in a place where it does not matter what is spoken against you. It does not matter how condemning or how brutal or how whatever verbal attack comes your way. It's possible to be in a place where you are protected from those words. Those words do not have to impact you or influence you. Hey, what's up, everybody? And welcome back to another episode of the Tattooed Preacher Podcast. This is episode 35. Hope you are all doing awesome. Today, in this episode, we're going to be looking at a couple different topics that are related. And so we're going to be looking at one of the areas where God promises to protect us. And I know that this subject of God's protection, when we look at some verses in the Bible and then we compare it to our experiences maybe and people's experiences, and so we're going to look at God's promised protection and also what that has to do with the power of our words and the power of our communication, the ability that God has given us to vocalize and communicate, just the significance of that and how that has a massive part to play in our lives, in spiritual warfare, in our relationship with God, in our relationship with others. And so I want to be looking at these kind of areas. This was from a recent God time session that I had, and I felt like it's something that I wanted to share. So that's where we're going in this episode. So if that interests you, you're going to want to stick around. But quickly, before we get there, if you haven't yet followed me on YouTube, please go. If you're watching this right now, press pause, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button on the video. That helps me out so much. And if you haven't yet followed me on TikTok, Instagram, all the links to all my social media platforms are in the description below. And if you're listening to this on Apple or Spotify, please feel free to give me a review. That just would help the podcast out great. So yeah, that's it. Sit back, relax, and enjoy episode 35. All right, so kind of how this all started was in one of my recent God times. I was reading Psalm 31, and I have read this psalm a ton of times in my life. And for whatever reason, on this particular time I was reading this psalm, verse 20 jumped off the page at me in a way that it never has before. And it just kind of set me on this little mini journey that I want to share for the remainder of this podcast. And so just to set up some context for Psalm 31, David's on the run. He's getting chased by Saul. And so he's in the hills, he's in the wilderness, he's hiding in caves. And so in the midst of him, in a very difficult situation, getting chased, running for his life, he kind of writes this psalm. And the whole psalm is basically him, asking God for help, asking God for protection, and then just reaffirming to himself, encouraging himself in the fact that God's watching over him, that God's got him, that, God's going to protect him. And so in the midst of this, he writes verse 20, and it says this. It says, "You hide them in the secret place of your presence from the conspiracies of mankind." And then this is the part that rocked me. "You keep them secretly in a shelter from the strife of tongues." You keep them secretly in a shelter from the strife of tongues. And that just jumped off the page and smoked me. Like, I couldn't keep reading after that. And then when I was done the rest of my reading, I went back to this, and I was sitting at my kitchen table, and this was late at night. And I was just like, there's something on this verse. You keep them secretly in a shelter from the strife of tongues. And the first thing that I was thinking about was the difficult tension that we see in, life in general, but in Christianity around when difficulties arise. Because there's a ton of verses in the Bible, especially in the Psalms, especially from David, that talk about God's protection. God's always pleading, or David's always pleading with God, protect me from my enemies, take care of my enemies, obliterate them. He's always asking God for help and to rescue him. And it's easy to read the Old Testament and read these kind of passages and then look at our modern day, our own lives, and then see what's happening in our world and be like, why doesn't God protect others the way he protected David? All these verses about God is our refuge and our strength, and he is our defense, and cry out to God, he's going to watch over you. There's all these verses in the Bible, but then when we look at our own lives or look at the way things are happening in our world, and it just doesn't seem like that's the case, and it creates this difficult tension. Like, does God actually protect? Like, are these verses, are they promises? How do we reconcile that? And so I was thinking about the difficulty there, because I've wondered that myself. It's a tension that I wrestle with. And, contextually speaking, when David's writing this, and pretty much all of the writings that happened around this time, it was a world of war. Like, this was like normal, that it was, nation against nation, city against city. It was completely different than our modern day is today. And so when David's, asking God to save him and to protect him and all this stuff, it's the context is war. The context is like, you got kings and you got nations trying to come at you and get you, and so it's really not the same as it is today in our own lives. And so, like, this is what's going on in my head, thinking about this. But then I kept thinking about that line, like, you keep them secretly in a shelter from the strife of tongues. And it was like, I think that this is a promise from God. That's guaranteed. It's one of these promises that is for everybody for all time, no matter what time you're living in, no matter what cultural context you're living in. And I was just like, you keep them secretly in a shelter from the strife of tongues, from words that people speak, from vocal attacks from the enemy. So there's tension there between, God protecting us physically from things and wrestling with that. But it was like I was meditating on this, and I'm just like, we can always be protected from the words of others. Because especially in our modern day, living in the West, what is one of the main ways, quote unquote, we get attacked in our digital world, in our social media world, is through words, is through people writing stuff about you, people getting in front of a camera, saying things about you. And it was like, I was like, you keep them secretly in a shelter from the strife of tongues. If you are connected with God, Because David is going to God here. He is, pleading with God for protection. He's on the run, but he's pursuing God. Like, he's connected to God. He loves God. He's given God his life. If you are in the shelter of God, it says here, he will keep you from the strife of tongues. That this verse, this promise here applies to you. This isn't just for anyone randomly. This is for someone who's like given everything to God. If God is yours and you are his, and you've given him your life, and verse 20 is saying you keep them secretly in a shelter from the strife of tongues. It's possible to live in a place where it does not matter what is spoken against you. It does not matter how condemning or how brutal or how whatever verbal attack comes your way. It's possible to be in a place where you are protected from those words. Those words do not have to impact you or influence you. Like that was, and then like that's a crazy realization. Like that's crazy. Though we can't control physical things a lot, physical attack, that's a difficult tension. What God is saying is regardless of that, you can always be in a place of safety in him from verbal attack, from verbal assault. And that was just like a crazy, I think I've always known that to some degree, to some level. But for whatever reason, this particular time, man, it was like God rocked me with that truth that you can always be in a place of protection from the strife of tongues from others. Always. You can't control what they say, but what God does say is that it does not matter what that is. In me, when you are in my shelter, when I've got you sheltered, they ain't touching you. They ain't getting you. Because so often, like when you look at over your life, there's that old common saying, sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. And everyone's like, well, clearly names hurt. When you get called a bad name, whether from a friend, family member, or, people at school or people from your workplace or just wherever on social media, it can hurt. It can sting. And I think we came up with that phrase to kind of make us feel tough, but words hurt. But what this verse is saying is that those words do not have to hurt. In God, those words do not have to hurt. And so then I'm thinking about this and I'm getting like, man, I was getting pumped up. Like I was actually legitimately getting encouraged from the word of the Lord here. And then I was thinking about the kinds of words. Like let's talk about words for a second. The attacks. What are verbal assaults? And so again, for a lot of people, depending on your upbringing, this could look a lot different. Maybe some of you grew up in a house with one or both parents or no parents, and you were spoken at in a very condemning fashion. Like I remember a story that I heard a number of years ago. There was someone that I once knew, and she mentioned that when she was growing up from a young age, for I can't remember the exact number of years, 6 or 7 years of her life, she thought her name was stupid because she was called stupid so much. Like she actually thought my name is stupid. And you look at, what that can do to the development of a child. And there's tens of thousands upon thousands of stories like that, where we grow up and the people that are supposed to be the closest to us and the ones raising us and helping to instill positive identities and all that stuff are the ones who end up doing the complete opposite. They can have a mark. And so that's one kind of verbal assault. And then so I was thinking about that. And then so for this podcast, I've been trying to think about like where I want to take it next and with the direction. And so there's so much stuff out there in our world about the occult, witchcraft, sorcery, satanic ritual abuse, satanic rituals and ceremonies, and like just all that kind of stuff. And so that stuff I think is so prevalent and even more so in our culture than people realize. And so what I want to do is, before I really start getting into that, because I've kind of hit on it briefly and from different angles, but I wanted to get a biblical understanding, like a biblical foundation on that whole subject, on the occult, on witchcraft, on sorcery. And there is so much in the Bible. It talks about it in so many places with so many nuances. And so I've been starting to read that and really familiarize myself with these ideas and concepts. And there's this one theme that, as I've begun to research it, I've seen all over. And it's the power of words. And the power of words mixed into the entire occult system. I was thinking about that, and I'm like, man, like, it's amazing that God protects us from the strife of tongues. And we can understand that, again, depending on our upbringing, from receiving condemning words, negative words, being called bad names, and all that kind of stuff. And it's amazing and it's freeing to know that God can heal us and restore us and protect us from that. But that's like the natural realm. But what about words from the spiritual realm, from the unseen realm, when you get into that stuff? And so as I've been digging into that whole biblical study, the concept of magic, the idea of magic, right, is everywhere in the Bible. There are so many places, and I'm just begun to scratch the surface, but here are some definitions that I've come across that I want to that kind of highlight the power of words here, and to really highlight this verse and how amazing it is. And so the Lexham Bible Dictionary defines the term magic as the use of verbal formulas for the purpose of causing observable change by means of superhuman power. The use of verbal formulas for the purpose of causing observable change by means of superhuman power. That's how they defined magic and everything underneath that, the entire occult system. Verbal formulas that, when attached to superhuman powers, demonic entities, can create realities. Here's another example from the Baker Encyclopedia of the Bible. They define magic as an attempt to influence or control people or events through supernatural forces. These forces are called upon by means of ceremonies, the recitation of spells, charms, incantations, and other forms of ritual. So these forces are called upon by means of ceremonies, and then the recitation of spells, charms, and incantations. Those are all verbal related. The casting of spells and incantations, to when infused with superhuman demonic entities, that can lead to observable results. This when it gets, man, like this when it gets powerful, like this when it gets intense. And then the Evangelical Dictionary of Biblical Theology defines magic this way: as the attempt to exploit supernatural powers by formulaic recitations to achieve goals that were otherwise unrealizable. Formulaic recitations. Again, verbal formulas to achieve, like, that once infused with supernatural powers to achieve things that you can't just achieve by natural means. And these are just 3 examples. And so as I've been looking into that, it's like this idea where in the demonic realm, in the kingdom of darkness, in the occult, in witchcraft, in sorcery, in all the branches, all of the that whole system, there's power in words. And not only words, but sound, like verbal sound, syllables put together in such a way that that attract demonic entities, demonic power, supernatural force to then achieve a desired result. Like, that's real. To me, this just took it to another level when I really started seeing that. Deuteronomy 18 verses 10 to 11 says this. It says, "There shall not be found among you anyone who makes a son or his daughter pass through the fire, one who uses divination," which is a form of the occult, "a soothsayer, one who interprets omens, or a sorcerer." Now check this out, verse 11, "or one who casts a spell." It's in the Bible. Casting a spell is in the Bible. And so it's like, when you realize this, that we've all experienced attack, we've all experienced, negativity via verbal communication in the natural world. Again, from friends, family, coworkers, kids we went to school with, like wherever. We've experienced that. We get that. And God, when we're secretly found with God, we can be protected from that. But then spiritually speaking, it like takes everything to another level. Because when you look around our world, and this is why I always harp on the power of music. There are so many songs out there that are written, and they're written in like these demonic environments where it's like this satanic ritual is happening, and it's in these environments that these lyrics, that these melodies, these songs are birthed. They're put together. They're infused with all this demonic nonsense, and then they're spewed out via the radio waves for the masses to then listen, and it affects people whether they realize it or not. That's a form of like this kind of recitation of spells and charms and incantations. It's the power of our words and the power of sound when it's infused with demonic power. It's a real thing. And it's been happening for literally thousands of years. This is Bible days. And this is just dealing with like the nation of Israel. We're not even getting into the pagan nations that were around them. We have to understand that there is a supernatural realm, and we are in a spiritual war with like real beings and people who are empowered by these demonic forces. Like, there are still witches and warlocks and sorcerers, people who practice this stuff. And I mean, like, there's so much testimony that's out there that you just go to YouTube or go to Google and type it in, and you'll get tons of stories and examples of this kind of stuff happening. But it's real. And it's that makes to me this verse just come alive. That it does not matter what demonic incantation or spell or charm or whatever is spoken against you from that realm, if you are found in God, cannot touch you. You keep them secretly in a shelter from the strife tongues. That if you're connected to God, you're in his tent. He is your refuge. You've given him your life, that it's possible to be in a place where we may not be able to control everything physically, but when it comes to things that are verbally spoken against us, whether it's in the natural, by natural means, or by kingdom of darkness, demonic, supernatural means, that we can be in a place of complete and utter protection. That's amazing. Like, that is powerful. That is so cool. And it's like this realization just struck me in a different way, in a new way. And it's like, God is good. And there's a lot of stuff we don't understand, but one thing we can understand is that he's able to protect us and shelter us from any verbal assault or attack that may come our way. And so that's a little bit into a little bit of my journey that I had with God last week. And as I've been kind of looking at this since, and just this newfound encouragement. So I want to encourage you. You don't have to be afraid of what people may say or do. You don't. And maybe you've had horrible experiences in your past with people, verbally coming at you. Or maybe you've encountered and experienced stuff from the demonic realm, and you understand the occult, and you've been in that situation and it's affected you. I want to encourage you that if you go to Jesus, if you go to God, he says he will protect you. We can't control what people may say or do, but what God does say is that regardless of what is said, you can be kept safe in the shelter of his presence from any strife of tongue. And I hope that encourages you. I hope that really encourages you. I hope that gives you a sense of peace and confidence and just security, knowing that you can be protected, that you are protected, that the enemy can fling at you as many arrows as he wants to, but you are protected in God. And those verbal assaults, those verbal attacks do not have to harm you, and they will not get you. You can be protected from them. So that's it for episode 35. And again, I hope that encouraged you, and feel free to leave any comments or questions in the comment section below if you're watching this on YouTube. Let's start a dialogue. And yeah, let me know some of your stories. Let me know some of the things that you've had to deal with or that you've struggled with, and how the power of words has impacted your life. So again, thanks for watching this. Thanks for listening to this. Have an awesome rest of your day or evening, and we'll see you all in the next episode. Much love, and God bless.